Okay, well, good morning. Thanks for being here. I want to thank UN for teeing this up. It's really a very interesting and a very useful tool that we've been able to play with recently. And what it's highlighted is a couple of things for me. One is that the possibilities for playing with this data are much more pronounced, much more robust now that we have this tool. And as this tool grows in its capabilities, I think we'll be that much more engaged with the data, that much more able to try and do new things with it and look at the data in different ways that we haven't been able to do before. For those of you who've seen admissions reports in the past from Webby, wonderful information, and Jackie Snow's group has done a fabulous job over the years trying to provide great data for us, but it's very dense. And this tool, I think, has a way of filtering the data, organizing it in ways that really makes it much more accessible, much more usable for a broader range of the university community. So there really is some tremendous strengths there, so I want to thank you, Ian's group, for putting this stuff together. So what I thought I'd do is walk through some of the slides that we have looked at and just provide some sample interpretations of selected pieces of data, acknowledging that, and you saw as Ewan went through the PowerPoint, her PowerPoint, actually using it live, the range of selections are many. So I am not attempting to cover all the possible interpretations or slices of the data in a very brief period of time, but really just trying to introduce a couple of possibilities for you to think about. And I've also shared in these slides a few questions that we might want to ask. And these are not necessarily the limit of the questions, but representative of the kind of questions, the kind of conversations that this representation of data can provide for us. So again, as I noted here, we wanted to configure admissions data in a way to see different relationships. And that really is a very important thing to do, particularly as we start positioning ourselves the way Victoria was describing. There are some serious challenges out there, but the university is a strong institution, and a way to meet those challenges really is to try and look at our strengths, look at our access to different markets and communities, and find ways in which we can connect with them more effectively. And that requires a greater partnership across the university. So it's nice that admissions is doing A, B, and C, but it may not be sufficient in the coming years to really realize the goals that we have. But if we can partner with academic departments, co-curricular units, student organizations, et cetera, to try and connect in ways that are more meaningful and address some of the interests and concerns of our student populations, we'll be that much better positioned to be successful. And that really emphasizes the second point I have here, is that the data should be a starting point for conversations. It shouldn't be the end. It shouldn't be just a final presentation, we're done with it and we move on, but rather it should open up ideas and suggestions for how we can do things differently. And that's really probably the most critical thing here. And then looking at the data beyond the context in which it was captured. And that requires some sophistication that comes from IR&A, but it also requires a level of familiarity and awareness amongst our colleagues around campus who may be viewing this data and utilizing it in ways in which it wasn't originally captured, but also allows a smart and useful application of that data into other applications that can help us make better choices. So I'm thinking about academic programs, CPA, any number of different units on campus could take this information and apply it in ways that it hasn't been considered initially. So this first slide looks at selectivity and competition, much like Ewan's slide did, but I just did a snapshot of a few things. I selected Durham undergraduates, Paul, business administration, Massachusetts kids, admitted and enrolled at another college. And it gives you some interesting information to help you understand what's going on. It does look at your average academic profile. It looks at your average high school profile. But it looks at it within the context of your competition. So I'm not sure you can read it particularly well, but on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, looks at the average SAT score as an example, the University of Massachusetts, and that first bar is the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And then to the right, it's looking at average high school percentile, acknowledging that there's some limitations to this data because a great many high schools do not provide class rank any longer. About a third, close to 40% at UNH don't provide a class rank. But it's a good starting point for understanding relative selectivity, relative competition. And again, the first bar graph there is from the University of Massachusetts. In the upper right-hand corner, the vertical bar graph looks at our top 10 competitors by lost admits. And you can see University of Massachusetts on the left-hand side, Bryant University, University of Massachusetts at Lowell, and goes down the line. All nice information, but I think by itself not particularly meaningful, but the questions you can ask from this data, it does get into the things that are most helpful, I think. And some of those possible questions to ask that really get into areas beyond the admissions office, but engage the academic departments and other departments around campus are, who are these competitors and why? If I'm in DePaul College and I see a school that's not AACSB accredited, I want to know, why is that school on this list? And what should we be doing or thinking about that would make us more competitive relative to those institutions? Is it programmatic services? Is it location? Is it some other service or opportunity that this institution is promoting that they think is particularly helpful that allows them to draw students who might have come to the University of New Hampshire? This also highlights, I think, another particularly important issue that Victoria touched upon very centrally, and that is the number of kids who are graduating in New England high schools is declining. The likelihood of a student to attend a school that's more than, say, 300, 350 miles from home gets very, very low very quickly. So one of the challenges here is how can we get a larger share of the market in our core areas? And some of that gets to very key issues about providing services, programs, experiences that help us differentiate ourselves and allow kids to see, this is a great place to be. This is an institution that cares about me. This is an institution where I'm going to have good academic and co-curricular experiences. So again, this data can lead to those kind of conversations and questions. So we can look at other questions. If the school is not AASB accredited, why is it on the list? How do we differ? And there's a lot of variety of other data sources that Yuene mentioned that can tie into this conversation to make a more robust conversation. So for example, the admissions office and other parts of the university do a fair bit of survey research to understand student behaviors. So we can integrate this survey response data into this information to get a more robust picture about why kids are choosing school A or B or C to help, again, inform our conversations. This can be applied to really any major. I just selected, by coincidence, Paul Business Administration. We can choose music and theater and other programs as well based on your academic and personal interests. I would encourage you to interrupt me with questions and have a conversation about these pieces of data as we go through. Applicant profile is another, again, important area to understand. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're enrolling competitive students for a lot of good reasons. Making sure that students who are most capable of meeting the academic challenges and demands of this campus is a primary goal of our responsibilities. But it also positions us well to make sure that we're competing with very good students, because good students want certain things. And understanding this profile is going to be really critical. So in this model, I selected Durham undergraduate, Colsa, nutrition, I think, and forestry, and admitted enrolled elsewhere. So this is a different slice of the population. It looks at a few different data points, looking at race, ethnicity, gender, first generation, and looks at the application details in terms of application count, but also the profile. I would note that the scale for the SAT math average is a bit skewed. The numbers are very, very similar. It's just that the left-hand blue bar is reported on a different scale, so it looks much compressed. But a couple of questions that can come out of this conversation. So if I'm in nutrition, this is nutrition, yes. If I'm in nutrition and I see that I've got 95% plus of my students are female, is that something I'm comfortable with? Is there something I should be concerned about? These are the kind of conversations that could be held at the department level. They can be held in the high school communities to understand, is this good for the profession? Is this good for healthcare? And are there things that the admissions office or other offices on campus can do to engage that conversation in such a way that we affect some change? So again, just samples of the questions that are there. First generation, they have about 20% or so of their students are first generation, slightly below the university average. If you were in a program that had a very substantial number of first generation students, is that something that you should be mindful of? Is that something we should be doing something different about? Should we be having conversations with different offices around campus to ensure that we're providing adequate and appropriate support to these students' somewhat unique academic and possibly developmental needs as they move through their college careers? So again, just sample questions to think about. Lost admit trends, really helpful to understand who we're competing against. And I think this is one of those key opportunities for us in the admissions, but also us in the university to look at more closely. Again, I'm just choosing one different slice of the population here. I did look at all 4 years. I looked at Durham undergrad, COLA, the psychology program, admitted, enrolling elsewhere, but students from New Jersey. Now again, as we talk about where our students come from, it's really important to not have a very micro focus on one particular state, because each state is going to be different, influenced by a whole host of different possibilities. both in terms of competition, what available options exist within their state, how are we perceived within that state, how far from Durham is that state, all number of different issues to consider. But it can help us understand our position within those areas, but also give us the opportunity to try and address things that we can control about perception, understand are we providing the kind of programmatic needs that are dictated and demanded by students from this particular population. But other areas to look at, cost, program perception, differentiation, location, all very critically important issues. But I think the key thing for me and the very interesting thing is you look in the bottom of this chart, it lists some of the schools that kids from New Jersey find very appealing. You see University of Vermont is on there, James Madison, University of Delaware, Penn State, Quinnipiac, Scranton, College of New Jersey, Rutgers, none of which would be surprising once you understand the context that we're talking about New Jersey kids. So geography plays an enormous role in the choices that kids are making. So we have to be mindful of that and see what we can do to try and influence that. But if we're looking at a kid from psychology, we might be interested in better understanding what's happening in psychology programs at Rutgers. What is the University of Delaware doing with psychology? And how do we position ourselves? How do we differentiate ourselves from those institutions, which I would think are very powerful draws for the kids from New Jersey? And if we can somehow highlight interesting opportunities, compelling possibilities, then we're in a very good position. That information requires a good partnership with academic departments to understand what is happening in those departments. The psychology department faculty members know more about Rutgers University psychology program than I do. So they'd be a very good resource to work with to understand how do we present the university in such a way that makes it more compelling. This is that selectivity analysis to heat. Oh, sorry, hey, John.
Before you leave the lost admit analysis, is there a way in the dashboard to look at it from what are the common characteristics of the students that we're losing?
On the top level, no. I'm looking at UAN here.
I think it depends on what common characteristics you refer to. We have a few categories: first gen, ethnicity, SAT, gender, but you could and we will add veteran and Pell Grant receiver. So you may have more categories. I don't know. You can let us know. But those are the categories we choose.
But I think your question is a good one because it does lead to the logical next step. Okay, this is a great starting point. It's not going to cover all the pieces of information you might want to consider or evaluate. So once you have the question in mind, that's the next step, whether that information comes from Yuine's office or Andy's office or my office. Then we can start organizing and providing data that would allow us to better understand the question and the answer to the question, possibly. So, again, great starting point, but the data exists on campus, that's for sure. That's the key thing. So this next one is selectivity analysis heat map. This shows the relative strength and draw the university has in different parts of the country. In this program, I selected all 4 years, Paul College undergraduate, all programs in Paul, all states, admitted, going elsewhere. And you can just see a few sample states. You can see that, I can't read this one very carefully, but in Washington State, their applicant count and admit count by state, we had 15 kids who applied to Paul, and all 15 were admitted, and so forth. So you can see the model as it plays out across the country. Again, high-level summary of the data may not be particularly useful, but it allows you to target areas you want to drill down into and learn more about. And again, within admissions, within other offices, we can drill down to the city level, the high school level. There's a few other geographic distributions, a few other geographic organizational tools that we have that can allow us to understand these trends more effectively. But again, it does get to the issue of that geographic reach of the university. One of the strengths of the university is its geographic draw. It makes the institution more diverse from a geographic, cultural perspective, and that can be very compelling for a lot of both academic but also enrollment perspectives. So the more we can understand those behaviors and those draws, the better off we're going to be able to be to address those concerns more specifically. It also gets at selectivity. How do we attract more students from broader geographic markets, which is, again, a fundamental challenge and responsibility for the university, given the demographic realities that we face in the Northeast. That, in turn, can lead to other questions. It's simply not a mechanical exercise to draw students to the campus. Rather, it's an integration with what we do as an institution. So what programmatic services, what programmatic offerings are we providing? how is that going to resonate with audiences in different parts of the country? They have to see a compelling reason or value to come here. So if we're going to encourage a kid from Missouri to traipse halfway across the country, there's got to be a pretty good reason. Academic programs, services, culture, those are the reasons why they're going to come here. So understanding what matters and what matters the most to people from different parts of the country is a key part of it. This also leads into, it circles back to one of the other slides that is a part of this process, and that's understanding the competitors. So if we're looking at Missouri, hypothetically, what is it about the University of Missouri or other parts of the higher education landscape in that part of the country that are important for us to understand and know about? Yield analysis, again, that's a very important admission metric and very important for enrollment to understand this. It has a real implication for the strength of the institution. What it means is what percent of admitted students are ultimately enrolling at UNH. It's made more complicated, I think, and this is important to acknowledge and look at when you're looking at this yield information, that very important to differentiate yield by in-state and out-of-state and not conflate the two, because they can be confusing and very, very different. So for example, our average yield for an in-state kid is about any given year 34, 35%. On the out-of-state side, it may be 15 to 17%. Now, for many of our public school peers, our yield rates are higher, and some they're lower. So again, a lot of it matters by geography. A lot of it matters driven by culture and tradition. So understanding these yield trends and this analysis is very helpful to interpreting the data. So in this example, I chose enrolling year 2016, Health and Human Services Nursing, undergraduate, all states, and admitted enrolled elsewhere. And you can see that in New York, it looks like 62 kids were admitted and 12 enrolled in this program. So again, it gives you a sense of the relative selectivity. If you compare that to New Hampshire and other close-in states, those numbers would look very different. But again, it raises questions, and that's really the whole point of the data, is to begin exploring this process from multiple perspectives. So where are the students going and why? What is it about institution A, B, or C that was more significant, was compelling to that young person to be able to choose to go there? Was it a cost factor? Was it a programmatic concern? Was it a geography issue? Any number of possibilities. But again, it's a kind of conversation. It's not just a one-office conversation. It's a conversation that engages multiple parts of the university, because students are choosing to come here for very complex reasons. They include things like, do you have my program? Certainly. Can I afford to be here? Yes. But then it's, will I fit in? And that's a complex question to answer, because it's more than just a single perspective. It represents the diversity of all student perspectives, and they all have different values, different expectations for their college career. But again, this information can help begin organizing that conversation. This is the academic profile bubble sheet, and this talks about what the distribution of the quality of our students might be. It looks at along GPA axis and an SAT axis, and that gives you a sense of the relative strength, academic strength of a program, an institution, a college division. And this one I chose SEPS, for example, toggling between at the top it's admitted and going elsewhere, and on the bottom it's admitted enrolling. The cut and paste version sort of skewed the shape of the bubbles on the bottom, so I apologize for that. But you get a relative sense of the size of the bubbles, and that's really what it's designed to do, is to give you a sense of who's enrolling, what their relative strengths are. Numerically, obviously, we have more kids not enrolling than enrolling, which helps partly explain the size of those bubbles. And then questions to answer. Again, if you're a person sitting in SEPS, am I happy with the academic profile of my institution, or my college division, or my major? If I'm not, what am I going to do about it? What sort of changes can I affect? What sort of services are higher ability students looking for? Because again, these are the kinds of questions that have to be addressed. If we want to maintain our position as a flagship public university, we have to be very mindful about the quality of students enrolling here. We also have to be very mindful about the experience they have as they go through their college career here. They want to be successful. We want them to retain and graduate at high rates. So again, if you want change, how and where? What are you going to do about it? And then what are the perceptions of UNH relative to our competition? So how do we think this looks compared to, if it's New York, say New York State, SUNY Binghamton, or SUNY Buffalo? How do we look compared to those institutions? Remembering, of course, that the composition of their student body looks a lot different than ours. They don't have as many non-resident students as we do in their undergraduate population. So that's going to change the data somewhat. So important questions to ask, but it provides that context to have those conversations. And then another enrolled student academic profile. You can see by the shift here between nursing, occupational therapy, and enrolling at UNH and then all states, and there's the differences you can consider there. But again, other things that this data can lead to conversations about relationship to retention and graduation issues. Is the academic profile of the kids coming into the institution strong enough to meet the expectations of the faculty and support the graduation retention rates that we're looking for? What's the program's aspirations for their competitive position? And what's the determination of what higher ability students value? What do they want from their academic careers? So these are, again, questions that come from the data.